If someone's telling you that your book is too expensive, it doesn't necessarily mean that your prices are too high. It might just mean you're listening to the wrong reader. The key is knowing whose opinion about your prices actually matters, and then finding the readers who are willing to pay you more for your book. And there are really 3 things you need to understand to do that. So first we have to realize that our prices don't reflect our worth. We've got this subconscious belief that our prices reflect not only our value, but also our worth as humans. And then you'll get a comment on one of your books about how your prices are way too high, how no one's ever going to pay that for just a book. It reiterates that negative feedback loop, and you tell yourself, you see, I knew that my prices were too high. But the thing is, no one's going to comment saying that your prices are too low, even if they would have been willing to spend more for your book. So then we start steering our prices towards the customers who are complaining the most, just to find that there's another set of customers below that who also think that that price is too expensive. So then if you have tied your price to your worth, to your value as a human, and people are telling you that it's too much and you're constantly lowering it, that's a really bad spiral to get into. So instead of thinking of your price as a measure of your worth, or even as a measure of the value of your book, you need to instead think of your price as a measure of the pain that you solve. The more acutely your audience feels the pain that you solve, the more that they're going to be willing to pay for your book. I think a lot of times we get in our head that books and stories are just leisure, they're just fun activities, and they don't actually solve any problems, but your books do solve problems, and we're going to get into that more in the next step. But first, a quick story. I've told you before about how I hired somebody to take care of my yard work. I found that it was taking me 3 hours plus to do the yard work and then not even do it very well. That's 3 hours a week that I could have been spending working on the business, generating income, spending with my family, relaxing, sleeping, doing anything other than sweating in the sun. So I hired somebody to do it, and he can knock it out in like an hour and do it way better than I ever could have done it. And so I'm not paying him though for the hour that it's taking him. I'm paying him not just for the 3 hours I'm getting back, but also to relieve the pain of having to do it myself. Now, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have felt that pain as acutely. 10 years ago, we had less kids, we had less businesses, I had more time, I had more energy, and so going out and doing the yard work is actually something enjoyable for me. Hiring somebody to do it for me would not have been relieving a pain, it actually would have been adding a pain. So just because 10 years ago I would not have thought that paying someone to do my yard work was worth anything, it doesn't mean that what they're doing wasn't worth it, I just wasn't the right audience at that time. That brings us to the second point of how do you find that audience? How do you find the part of the market that is willing to pay more for your book? You gotta start thinking about the market as a bell curve, and along each point of the curve is a different amount of pain that the audience feels. We can break that curve up into 3 different sections, but first, what problem and what pain is your book actually solving? When you think about books solving problems, you might think about specifically nonfiction books. However, even fiction solves a pain. At the very least, you're giving readers an opportunity to have leisure and entertainment that doesn't involve a screen or an algorithm. You're giving people the chance to escape from their day-to-day and just dive into a story that lets them kind of forget what's going on in their normal lives. You're helping to create empathy and guide the reader through difficult emotions. And those are all very real pains that your books solve. This is going to be easier to illustrate going through that bell curve. So on one side of the bell curve, you have the people who really don't have any pain or any concept of that pain at all. These would be people who say that they don't like to read. They prefer other forms of entertainment. They can't get into a book. Now, we know that books can still benefit those people and that there's a book for everyone out there, but the amount of work it would take to convince that segment of the market that they have a problem and that reading is a good solution and that your book is the specific solution to that problem is such a big lift, it's honestly not worth the investment of time. I like using the doctor analogy here. Think about the person who is either very healthy or believes that they're very healthy, or they're unhealthy and they really don't care that they're unhealthy. They have other problems and they're not worried about their health. They would not be bothered to go to the doctor even if it was free because they wouldn't want to waste their time doing it if that's not important to them. And for somebody to convince them that they have a problem, that there is a health issue, that it is important, that they should go to the doctor and actually pay for it is going to be a really big lift. So moving past that segment of the market, next is you have the middle part, and this is the largest part of the market. This is the people who like to read. They enjoy the benefits. They know that there are benefits to reading. They don't see it necessarily as a pain that they're solving, but they enjoy reading and they're going to spend money on a book. These are people who are going to buy based on price and convenience, and they may be a little bit less loyal to the author and to the story if the price gets too high or if it becomes too inconvenient for them to purchase or read the book. This segment is really good for wide appeal and high volume of transactions, but you're going to be limited to whatever the market says your book is worth. If people within this segment of your market are used to spending $10 for a book, you're going to have a hard time selling your book for $15 if they feel like they can get an alternative version of that for cheaper. The doctor analogy here would be the person who cares about their health. They are generally healthy, but they can recognize whenever there's an issue, and so they're willing to go to the general practitioner, the family doctor, whenever they feel like something isn't quite right. They'll pay their insurance copay as long as it's reasonable, and they're probably going to choose a doctor who is closest to their work or home. They're not going to go terribly out of the way unless if they really, really like the doctor that they go to. Even then, for the right price and the right convenience, they would be willing to leave that doctor. Because this is the biggest part of the market. This is usually the market that includes all the comments that you get on your books. This is the part of the market that most people are marketing to. So while it's a large market, it's also a very saturated market, and you're going to be dealing with a lot of competition. Now, all the way at the other end of that bell curve, you have the people who feel the pain you solve most acutely. They have a specific problem that your book solves, and they will pay anything you ask for that book, and they will get it in any format that you offer it. These are the readers that are going to be lifelong fans. They're going to pre-order every single thing you put out, no matter what it is, without even knowing what it's going to be. Doctor analogy here. Let's say, God forbid, you got a brain tumor. You're not going to your family doctor. You're not going to the general practitioner. You're finding the best brain surgeon that you can find that's within your means, that will not bankrupt your family, no matter where they are. You will fly to another state to find the doctor who can cure you. This is a much smaller portion of the market, and if you're going to go after this portion, you're going to be spending a lot more time and money on positioning and marketing and messaging than you would if you were trying to reach the middle part of the market. Now, here's the thing about that top part of the market. While they're willing to spend more money for your book, they may actually not be willing to spend less money for it. Here's what I mean. I saw a video recently where somebody was talking about book prices. And they said, picture it like you've got 10 potential customers, and all of them are willing to buy your book, but at different prices. He said, let's say that one person would buy your book at $15, another person at $12, another 3 people at $10, and the rest of them at $3. He was going through the math on how to figure out where to price your book, but he made the point that if somebody was willing to buy your book at $15, they would also be willing to buy it at $12 and at $10 and at $3. And I disagree with this. I think if there's somebody who's willing to spend $15, $20, $25 on your book, if they see that exact same book at $2.99, their perception might be that that book is not going to solve their problem because it's not worth it, because it's only worth $3. There's a story from this book, Influence, that illustrates this really well. And I don't know where the story came from. The story goes like this. There's this jeweler, and he's having trouble selling, let's say, jade. They try putting it in different parts of the store. They put it in the display window. They run advertisements to it, do everything that they can to sell this thing, but they cannot sell the jade. And in a fit of frustration, he writes down a note to his sales manager that says, jade times 1/2. He closes the shop. He goes home. He goes back to the store at the end of the next day, and he sees that all the jade is gone. He goes up to the sales manager and says, finally, we sold all the jade. I guess we were charging too much. I'm glad we cut the price in half. And the sales manager's face drops, and he says, in half? I thought you meant to double the price. I charged twice as much for it, and everyone bought it. There was this perceived value that since it cost more, it must be worth more. And we have the same mentality in our book businesses. You feel like if you charge too much for your book, you're going to be leaving out a whole section of the market. But if you charge lower prices for your book, then you'll catch everyone. And that's just not the case. So after you've realized that your price is a measure of the pain that you solve, and you've kind of looked at the different market segments to see who feels that pain most acutely, the third thing is to figure out what part of the market you want to sell to and how to find those people. You might be thinking at this point that you're stuck in the middle section, that you just write books, and so what real pain are you solving that you can just charge any price for? I'll give you an example, and it's not really necessarily about what kind of books you write, but more how you position them. One of my good friends has a daughter who's getting into writing, and knowing that I work with authors, she wanted me to read her daughter's work just to give my feedback on it. She had written this short story, and I didn't know anything about it going into it. The story was all about grief. The character in the story had lost their mom. This was 6 months later, and it went through the emotions of after losing a loved one and what happens 6 months, 1 year later, whenever everyone else has kind of moved on, but you're still feeling the pain of that loss. She captured the emotions and the roller coaster of that beautifully, perfectly. Having lost my mom a few years ago, I really related to that story. Now here's the thing, reading that story and other stories that contain elements of grief have been helpful for me in processing my own grief. But let's say that my unresolved grief was so painful that it was affecting my day-to-day life. It was affecting my health, my family, my business, and everything that I was doing every single day. If I was in that situation and I was recommended a book and the person said, this book is not a self-help book. This is a fiction book, but it will walk you through the stages of grief and it will help you to come to terms with your own grief. I would buy that book without looking at the price. The book wouldn't have to be rewritten. The book wouldn't have to be actually a self-help book. You just have to recognize, if you are going to go after those people who feel the pain most acutely, you have to recognize what pain is it that they feel and then figure out a way to message your book and to talk about your book in a way that answers that pain. So this is more than just the genres and the tropes that you're using. I'll give you a way less morbid example. Think about Dungeon Crawler Coral. It is a very specific book for a very specific audience, but look how much it's caught on. If Dungeon Crawler Coral came out today with no audience, it would only really appeal to mostly guys. I'm not going to say it's only for guys, but guys who grew up playing video games probably in the 90s and that appreciate a very specific style of humor. And looking at that through the lens of pain, what pain is that really solving? It's nothing as serious necessarily as grief or loss or whatever, but it would be solving the problem that that group might feel that they don't have a set of books that's specifically for them. That series is a really good example of a series that has a very specific market that ended up spilling over into way more than that. He's got a TV show now coming out. And you can think of that bell curve as not just the entire market. Within each segment of the bell curve, you're going to have many bell curves. So maybe you don't solve grief or family loss. Maybe your books do belong in the big part of the market, but within that big part of the market, you can find the people who resonate most deeply with the story that you're telling and the way that you tell it. The author industry is extremely unique. I'm going to link to a video I did recently about stories and why they're so important, but book prices haven't really changed in the last few decades. So, especially if you're in that big part of the market, there will be pushback from the market if you push your prices up above where the market currently sits. But you cannot wait for permission from the market to raise your prices. The market is made up of the collection of all the things available at all the prices available. So it's going to have to start with you. I promise that there are people out there who are willing to spend more for your book than you're currently charging, but they're not going to tell you. You're going to have to go out and find them. Let me know in the comments if you have raised your prices to a point where you felt uncomfortable and what the result was of that. And I will see you next time.